Test, fix, save a life. Too many people are letting radon gas enter their home and harm their family, but you do not have to be one of them. Good morning. It's Monday, February 6th. I'm Jessica Lovell, and welcome to the Morning Medical Update. Radon kills thousands of people year after year when it doesn't have to. Today, our goal is not to scare you, it's to empower you, to give you the knowledge that at best can save lives and at least can give you some peace of mind about the safety of your home. Today, we are highlighting radon's health risks, how to test for dangerous radon levels in your home. We'll find out why it's such a problem here locally and how to evict radon, making the air in your home much healthier. First, what is radon? It's an invisible radioactive gas, no taste, no smell. A small amount comes out of the ground naturally. You can't avoid it, but it's only a health concern when it gets trapped indoors. If you spend a lot of time around a lot of radon, your cancer risk goes way up. Every year, an estimated 21,000 Americans die from radon-related lung cancer, according to the Surgeon General's office. Our lung experts today are here in studio with me, Dr. Mario Castro. He is a pulmonologist and Vice Chair of Clinical and Translational Research at the KU School of Medicine. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And always great to have Dr. Bill Barkman, also a pulmonologist, but he's an environmental health specialist here at the University of Kansas Health System. Hi.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Okay, so we also have radon experts joining us remotely. Molly Schreiner is an environmental protection specialist with the EPA, and Brian Hansen is the coordinator of K-State radon programs. He's a nationally recognized expert and someone the EPA relies on for all things radon. These experts are all ready to take your questions, so you can send those in to us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the Medical News Network. You can find links to those right there on your screen. So how do we check for radon if we can't see it or smell it? Alan Van Zant went to his own basement to show us this super simple test.
We're here to see if I've got a radon problem here today. I ordered this kit online. You can pay $100, $150 online, and we ordered this for free. And it's really very simple. When opening up the packet, here's the radon test itself. It looks like little charcoal bits in a little packet here. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's got an instruction kit for you at home, an information form to fill out that you'll send back with the kit, and then a self-mailer with even a return address to put on there. So it's time now for the test, and this is the real tricky part. Don't blink or you'll miss it. We're going to take this charcoal packet, we're going to set it down on a flat surface just like that. There, our test has begun. Don't place it near any heating or air conditioning vents, and don't place it where it will get wet. You want it dry. You want rooms with low humidity, not in a bathroom, not in a kitchen. Don't place it in crawl spaces or closets. And again, we're on the lowest level of my home here in the basement, so our test has begun. All right, it's 3 days later now. We're back in the basement of my house to check on the radon test. Let's go to where we set it here a couple days ago. Again, we did not open this up. We left it sealed, and that's the way we're going to keep it. Again, the charcoal packets are here. We're going to put it in the sealed envelope that they sent with us. Actually, it's not sealed now, but we're going to seal it when we put that in, along with the directions and the information packet that I filled out. And we're going to put it in, seal it, and then put on the return address label and send it to the lab. Again, 1 in 4 homes in Kansas and Missouri have an overabundance of radon in their basements, which can be dangerous. We're going to hope for the best out of my house as we check up on this test. We'll follow it along online. Back to you.
Most hardware stores carry them, and actually you can typically find them for around 15 to 20 bucks. That price should also cover any lab fees, or you can go online through a government health department. Websites are right there on your screen. And just one note, Missouri residents can actually get them mailed for free if they go through the health department. There's also the American Lung Association at lung.org/radon. And a word to the wise, do not forget about those tests. You cannot let those radon tests sit for more than a week. That ruins the charcoal sample, and that's all laid out and explained in those instructions. We now know how to test for radon, but what are we looking for in those test results? Let's talk more with Molly Schreiner from the EPA and Brian Hansen with K-State Radon Programs. Molly, explain the current EPA radon guidelines. They're right here. We want to show them on your screen. And first, before you do that, what's picocurie?
So a picocurie, it's the amount of radon in the air that is measured, and it's the rate of radioactive decay of radon. So approximately with our action level of 4 picocuries, there's approximately 12,672 radioactive disintegrations in 1 liter of air during a 24-hour period. So yeah, that's a picocurie.
Okay, picocurie, new word. I had never heard that before. So learning a lot about radon. I never knew about this until I tried to buy a house here in the Midwest, coming from the West Coast. So this is really, really interesting and eye-opening. So the guidelines, I want to see that again. Just kind of help us understand those guidelines, because the guidelines say to consider fixing the problem between 2 and 4 picocuries, but at the same time, several studies show that radon can still cause cancer even below 4 picocuries per liter. So why not just tell people to fix it at 2?
Well, so we recommend mitigation, for several reasons at 4, but first, lower levels at 2 picocuries that come in when people test the measurement devices could be telling us some false negative errors, false positive errors that may happen. But secondly, with 4 picocuries, mitigation research indicates that levels can be reduced all the way down to 4 when levels are very high in the home. We have seen, 100 picocuries plus maybe in some homes. So this recommended level of 4 picocuries, if someone's a lot greater than this number, we believe that this number can be reached if they are extremely above that. But research also shows that 2 picocuries can be achieved 70% of the time as well, depending on how your home is sealed and whether or not there are cracks in the foundation or not. That all plays into getting your levels to a safe level. But we believe that no matter the level, if you feel like you're at risk, we say please mitigate no matter what. It's better to be safe and limit your risk no matter the level in your home. But 4 is definitely the number we recommend to people, especially in the Midwest.
Brian, I want to bring up this EPA radon map. It's actually from 1993, and since then it's been up to really each state to care. Kansas is a state that does care. So tell us about what your team does and what kind of initiatives you're pushing out.
So the Kansas Radon Program is the state public direct technical assistance program, which we operate here at Kansas State University. We also, by contract with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, we also operate the National Radon Technical Assistance Hotline by cooperative agreement with EPA in Washington, D.C. So if you call the Kansas 800 number for radon questions, if you call SOS 800 SOS Radon for radon questions, you're going to be talking to us. So we are really one of the first points of contact both at the state and nationally for individuals with questions on radon. We also do professional education, public education, any number of other things, including trying to keep the data for the state of Kansas looking a little bit more current.
So Brian, how does radon get inside the home? Molly mentioned cracks in foundation, but if it's in the ground, why doesn't it just stay in the ground? Is it constantly rising?
So we have, the radon entry into a house is multifactorial, but if we bury it down to the 2 probably most critical things for any given house, 1, it's the amount of source strength of radon directly beneath your foundation, and 2, it's the amount of negative vacuum pull that your house generates on that soil when your house is closed. So when a house is closed, like it is when you're running your furnace or your air conditioner, by design, the house generates a slight negative atmospheric pressure. This negative atmospheric pressure is there to bring fresh air into the home so you're not keeling over in that closed box from a lack of oxygen, which means that, functionally speaking, your houses suck. And they suck on the soil, which is pulling the radon through those openings and penetrations in your foundation into that small box, that small finite volume of air, which can allow the radon to concentrate in the indoor environment, sometimes to spectacularly high levels compared to what we could ever see outside.
So I remember, Brian, when I was buying a home here, we had, before we could even purchase it, it was part of the inspection process. You had to have somebody come over and make sure that see what the radon levels. Is that typical everywhere?
So, common misconception, Kansas does not require radon testing at point of sale. There is language in the real estate contracts, however, in Kansas that strongly suggest you include a professional radon test as part of your home inspection. And Kansas is a certification state, which means that the state issues licenses and standards of practice for anyone doing professional measurement or mitigation work within the state. Compare that to, unfortunately, on the Missouri side of the border, while in Missouri, known radon results must be disclosed at point of sale. They have not yet decided to regulate the industry in any way, so it's a more buyer beware type situation when you're looking for a professional on the other side of the border. Yeah.
All right, good to know. Molly, why are radon levels higher in the Midwest? You mentioned that, but in the upper plains especially, does it have to do with the soil, the weather? Kind of help us understand that.
Well, with radon, weather definitely plays a role. So as the weather changes, the radon levels change. And depending on where you are in the United States and how the radon, how strong the levels are, like Brian said, within your area or below your home, it can play a role when the weather changes. So specifically with severe drought conditions, because droughts have increased and they have been prolonging, we recommend you might want to retest your home if you have been in those drought prone areas, especially areas of Kansas. I was looking into some research that there might be areas that need to be retested because there's increased in cracks, especially during droughts. Your basement floors might see more cracks. And then the drier than normal soil under the homes contributes to those higher levels of radon. So the weather definitely plays a role, especially with that negative pressure that Brian was talking about. So as the weather changes and as we're keeping our furnace and air conditioners on, that definitely plays a role in the Midwest area, definitely.
So Brian, let's talk about radon mitigation. How do we get rid of it, most importantly? How do I keep it out of my home?
So since the problem with radon in houses is that negative pressure, that negative vacuum pressure that the house generates when it's closed, we take advantage of that by trying to invert those pressure differentials. And we're trying to make the soil negative to the house, which weakens the ability of the house to pull the radon in. And the process we use to do this also is continuously removing some fraction of the radon that's being captured underneath the foundation and venting it directly to atmosphere, which is where it's trying to go to in the first place. This is called active soil depressurization. This requires the installation of a permanent mechanical system that acts and runs continuously. And shown here are the two most common ways in which a system is installed into an existing house. We either run the ventilation stack, which is typically a 3 to 4 inch PVC ventilation pipe. We connect the pipe to the soil beneath the foundation. We exhaust it above the roof line, either up through the home, exiting through the attic and the roof. If we go this route, we can put the fan up in the attic. If we can't go up through the home, we can go to the outside of the house and then vent over the roof line. In this case, the fan would go outside at ground level as pictured on the right picture. So the fan then is what's going to generate the vacuum underneath the house. Now, the goal here is to not generate a black hole underneath your house. We literally just want to beat the amount of negative pressure that the house generates in winter, which is when we're maximizing that stack effect because we're actively heating the air in the house.
So we've talked about what radon is, and we've shown you how to test for it and how to get rid of it, because really the only reason we care about this is because of one risk, that is cancer. Radon is the leading cause of lung cancer for non-smokers, according to the National Cancer Institute, NCI. We're going to talk more about that with our lung experts here in just a second, but first let's get a quick check on our COVID count with Dr. Dana Hawkinson, Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control. You are back.
Yeah,
rested from vacation, I guess? A working vacation?
Yeah, it was CME, so it's continuing medical education.
All
yeah,
right.
so
But I think you probably...
we need to keep up with
but it's better to do that by the
knowledge.
beach, right?
You know, that does help, for sure.
It does help.
for
All
sure.
right. Well, we're glad to have you back. What has changed as far as the numbers since you left us?
Not much. It looks like we are still, still having more than we would like to see of active infections in the hospital, unfortunately. 24 active infections, 47 total. Of those total 24 active infections, we have 5 in the ICU, which again is a higher number than we like to see, and 2 on the ventilator. So it really looks like our hospitalization numbers, and again, these are people with COVID. These are patients who are here because of effects of COVID that may have tipped them over their illness, if they have heart disease, lung disease, other chronic comorbid conditions, because we do only test those people that are exhibiting symptoms or having problems. So unfortunately, we are still having a good number of active patients in the hospital.
I want to ask you about a recent recall of artificial tears. The brand is EzraCare artificial tears.
Yeah.
The CDC found at least 55 cases where a bacteria in the eye drops caused infections. Now, none of these cases are reported in our area, but this particular strain of bacteria, it's very drug resistant. It's never been reported in the U.S. before. So first, just thoughts on trying to treat a drug resistant bacteria.
Yeah, this is very difficult, and certainly we know that the Kansas Department of Health and Environment has sent out an alert to providers in Kansas about this. This is a bacteria that is very common. We see these infections all the time. Dr. Barkman, Dr. Castro, we treat these infections all the time. This particular infection, though, this strain, just as you said, Jessica, has been identified as having multiple antibiotics resistances. That makes it very difficult to treat. As of right now, we really just have about 1 drug that we could potentially treat it with out of 5 or 6 or 7 that we would normally be able to use to treat this type of bacterial infection. So it is very important to understand. We need to let our critical care docs, our primary care providers, really everybody who may be seeing these types of infections, just to be on the lookout for that. But again, we do know that this type of bacteria is common. It does cause a lot of infections out in the community, but also in the hospital. But this particular one, because of its resistances, is quite important to understand. We will be on the lookout for that. We do have our emerging infections and preparedness committee that we do talk about these things. So we will be looking for it as well. So that is very important to understand. And this just goes to show you, again, we are in a constant battle with our environment around us. This bacteria is found in the environment, but there are so many other things as well. We see food recalls every day for other infections as well. It is a continued important battle that we are fighting against the microbes around us. And that's why the FDA and other surveillance networks that we have to help protect and safeguard against these types of things is so important.
All right, Doc Hawk, thanks so much. Good to have you back.
Yeah.
Dr. Castro, Dr. Barkman, thanks for sitting here hanging tight with me.
Sure.
Questions for you, of course. So, Dr. Castro, the National Cancer Institute tells us radon is the leading cause of lung cancer for those who do not smoke. So, how do we know that this is a cause of lung cancer and not just a correlation?
Well, radon's been well studied, and we know it probably accounts for 10 to 15% of lung cancers that we diagnose. And as mentioned in your intro, it is the leading cause for patients that don't smoke. Those causes of lung cancer in patients that have never picked up a cigarette. And so we know that this is a carcinogen, though, based on looking at exposure of airway cells to it. It causes them to become cancerous. So we know that this causes cancer. And then some of the best evidence actually comes from work that was done in minors, showing that in minors, the exposure levels of radon is about 100-fold. As you can imagine, they're down deep where the soil is, where radon is being produced. Yeah. And so that exposure risk elevates their risk of lung cancer substantially. And so we know that is true. Now, we're talking about those that don't smoke, but also when you think about those that also smoke, they work together, unfortunately, and cause even higher rates of lung cancer. So it's a problem for all of us to pay attention to whether or not you don't smoke or whether or not you do smoke.
It's silent in so many ways, because if we don't talk about it, you just really don't think much of it, right, Dr. Barkman?
Correct, correct.
I mean, it's scary. So what you're saying is that when we hear of somebody who has lung cancer, who has died of lung cancer, and people always say, gosh, they didn't smoke at all. Right. Is it fair to make that leap to radon immediately, or are there other things you rule out?
Sure. Well, there's at least 1 out of 5 lung cancers are in non-smokers, and so there are other things that do cause lung cancer. Asbestos is one of the well-known causes, but also just things in the air pollution that probably represents 1 or 2% of lung cancers out there. And then, having grown up in a family that smokes, well, environmental tobacco smoke exposure also raises your risk, even if you're a non-smoker.
I was trapped in a car with cigarette smoke for years, and in my house for years. It's like, gosh, we've learned so much, and that's why I want to ask you, Dr. Barkman, as an environmental specialist, has our medical knowledge linked to radon grown?
Well, definitely. I mean, as Dr. Castro mentioned, if you really go back in time, the first inkling of this was in uranium miners in the Colorado Plateau. And that was in the 50s. You think about how science has moved forward and how we diagnosed lung cancer in 1950. We didn't even have bronchoscopes then. I mean, and we didn't have easy ways to do this. And so they found that a lot of the uranium miners were smokers, but not all of them, and they found this increased risk. Well, then it's kind of interesting, because then the science was applied the other way. They exposed animals, and they showed the causality. Usually we're exposing animals to something looking to see if it's an agent. This way, it went the other way. And then from that standpoint, and they found that uranium miners, if you just increase the ventilation, it decreased their risk factors. So over time, the EPA develops the regions of levels of exposure, as she pointed out in 1993. So we keep moving forward, and again, it takes time. The other thing, as Dr. Castro was talking about, all of us talk about smoking being lung cancer. Well, it was always felt that, well, that's a personal environment disease. We didn't pay attention to the other. The science is starting to show that air pollution can be a factor, radon a factor, and radon's easy to deal with, quite frankly, and so you should know. But it's a public health thing that is sort of silent. And you don't get the idea. And so we need to keep it out there. And I think one of the things that's helping us now is that 20% of people that get lung cancer aren't smokers. So people are getting the idea that we need to be looking harder at this. And the science is going to improve over time. There's no question about that.
So I know you take it seriously, but do we as a whole, as a population, take it seriously? Or are we still getting to where we're doing the testing and learning about the risks?
Awareness is not there yet.
Okay.
If, in fact, 1 house in 4 in Kansas has elevated rate, and if 1 out of 5 lung cancers are not related to smoking, we have work to do. And I think it's just going to take time. The awareness piece, having discussions like this should be important, and people can understand. The EPA drives the numbers, but in reality, it's a state issue, and each state looks at it differently. As Brian and I were talking earlier, North Dakota's got a high rate but they don't certify anybody in terms of evaluation or mitigation. So we're not there yet, but I think it's improving.
All right.
But I think the idea now that lung cancer isn't just related to smoking is going to help also, because people are going to ask the questions. And if you think about it, just think if you have a 90-year-old that comes in with lung cancer that never smoked, but lived in the same house and never was tested for radon. Again, a possibility. It's very hard to say, hey, radon was the cause in your particular case because of genetics and all. But the point being, we know what safe levels are, and I think there's science being done in Canada showing also what levels are safe for in the home exposures, because Canada's got certain areas that radon's elevated also. So I think this is an ongoing thing. We're making progress. We're not there yet.
As lung doctors, do you talk to patients and, well, anyone who will listen about radon tests and testing their home? Is that something that you must be a big proponent of doing?
Yeah, I think it's very important, Jess. And one of the things I talk to patients is, as we're seeing less smokers out there, now we need to focus on those other causes. And this is one of those causes, is that radon exposure. And so, I myself I was selling my home in St. Louis and went to test it, and lo and behold, it was higher. And I was like, I'm worried now because I raised my children in that home, right? And so we went through mitigation strategies. But perhaps we need to be thinking about it more often. We need to be testing more often. As your experts, Brian, and others mentioned, it's, your climate changes. And so how are we going to think about this is not just when you're selling your house. Perhaps we need to think about this at other periods of time and regularly kind of do some checkup on that.
Well, you just made a really good point. After you've lived in a house for 20 years, now going, oh, aha. Wish I would have checked for that before somebody else comes in and make it safe for them.
Along those lines, most people don't know the EPA has the radon map out there. And I mean, if you look at that, you got family in areas that it's elevated in zone 1, you should be saying, hey, you need to consider this. I mean, it's a wonderful demonstration. Zone 2, your risk is less. I think Brian can probably tell us, 1 in 8 or 10 homes, and then zone 3, it's 1 in 10 to 15 homes, something like that. Is that correct, Brian?
Correct. And locally, the original estimate by EPA for Kansas was, again, about 25% of houses, or 1 in 4 statewide, would be elevated. What you're looking at here then is the original map for Kansas from EPA on the right, and on the left is a more current map that we've generated internally based on data submitted to the CDC's Environmental Public Health Tracking Network, which is in the process of developing a national portal for radon data. So this, the primary difference here is I've got more red on my map today than what EPA originally estimated. And, there's a few reasons for that, but I think I'm going to lay them down to 2. One, the sample sizes in 93 were honestly pretty small in our houses, because that's what they were able to get done. So I have better data, I have more data, but also, 2, our testing methodologies have really gotten better over the last 30 years.
Let's check and see if we have any reporter questions on the line today. Well, let's get to our viewer questions. Joellen, good morning. She wants to know, what's the radon risk in an apartment on a ground floor versus maybe a second floor? Is it the same as a house? Brian?
Yes, complicated, depends a bit on building materials and what region of the country you are in. For us here in Kansas and Missouri, if we're dealing with a traditional stick-built 4-story apartment, then yes, the greatest probability of a unit in an apartment building being elevated will be those ground contact units, whether they're first floor or garden or what have you. And then as you move up through the property, up through the levels of the structure, expected rates of concentration will drop down, primarily just because of additional dilution effects from outdoor air. Now, there are regions of the country, such as the East Coast, where the hurricane-rated all concrete condo buildings, you can have elevated levels of radon well off the ground contact floor. In this case, it's not a soil gas issue. It's actually an issue of the radon coming off the concrete.
Molly, what if I live in a home that has a walkout basement? Doors opening more often. Does that help?
Yeah, it definitely helps. The more you're able to open your windows and doors, that pressure can be released. But obviously, if it's really cold outside or really hot, we might not do that as much. So that's why the Midwest, in the western states, it's harder for us to keep those windows open to limit that exposure.
That makes sense. Jesse wants to know, what about people working from home more often? Chris, are they having a higher exposure to radon? Brian?
Oh, Yes, and on kansasradonprogram.org, our state website, there's a fact sheet subpage. We're getting this question so much in 2020 and 2021. We sat down and worked the math with the American Lung Association of the Upper Midwest and wrote just a two-pager that looks at that. And the answer is yes. Your lung cancer risk is based on your dose exposure, and your dose exposure is based on two things. What's the concentration of the radon multiplied by your time of exposure? So a lot of people were a lot more concerned about what their doses looked like, after going from maybe being in the house, 8 to 12 hours of the day to 18 to 24 hours of the day. So you can take a look at that on kansasradonprogram.org, and that might help answer some of those questions. But the short answer is yes.
Dr. Barkman, Jenna is asking, what about places like churches and schools? Do those places get tested?
Not unless they actively try. I mean, they're not.
No requirements necessarily?
No requirement.
Interesting. Question from Nate. Is there any financial assistance available for someone who wants to install a radon mitigation system?
Short answer is no. Long answer is it's a little state dependent. Colorado has a small pot of money each year for low income, but that's the exception rather than the rule. We've tried to get even IRS credits or even HSA allowances to use our HSA accounts to pay for this, and we've had, unfortunately, no success with that.
And last question, some folks asking where else radon can come from. Lynn said she'd heard it comes from granite countertops. Cindy asking if it comes from water. Are there other sources?
Yes, but in the absence of other information, we don't expect them to be significant. Our expectation for a single-family house with no other information about that house is that the predominant source of radon is going to be the soil beneath the foundation. Granite countertops, any natural stone will have uranium, which is the source for radon. So any natural stone will emit a little bit of radon, but in a 2,000 square foot home, 20 square foot of granite in your kitchen is really not going to generate much additional radon, not even really measurable unless we have our devices right on that on that stone. The water issue is a potential problem in, again, certain regions of the country, Maine, New England, Appalachia, the Arkansas Mountains, the Smoky Mountains, the Rocky Mountains, any areas where wells that are attached to private houses that penetrate substantive amounts of granite to get to the water can potentially have enough radon in that water to act as a secondary point source.
I want to get to final thoughts for our guest today, and Dr. Barkman, I'm going to start with you. What else did I not ask you, or what else do we need to know?
Well, I think it's been a great program. The other thing is, if you're building a house, there are strategies to go through to build it, to reduce it for the future. And so I think that your builder, you should discuss that with them. And I don't know, Brian, does the state have guidelines for people that build houses or thoughts about how to reduce radon with that? That's one thing I would bring forward, because people want to build homes or redo their homes, and be sure you check with your builder so that you make the best effort.
Yeah, Brian, I wonder if that's even being discussed with homeowners.
It is. So a few states like Illinois and Minnesota have attached those requirements to their statewide building codes. Kansas and Missouri are both home rule states when it comes to that. They do not have statewide building codes that we can take that route with. So it becomes a local code official or local code adoption issue. In the Kansas City metropolitan area, we know that Olathe, Lenexa, Gardner, DeSoto, Eudora have all adopted those requirements over the last couple of years. Obviously, that would only apply to those houses built since adoption. Manhattan has had those requirements since 2001, Topeka since 2005. Lawrence since 2007, and Junction City and Salina since about 2013.
Dr. Castro, final thoughts from you today.
Well, one area we haven't covered is, what if you're like me and you've had that house for 20-some years and you don't know, what's the consequence of that? Well, we do have a screening device out there.
Okay.
We were on Morning Update a few weeks ago talking about lung cancer screening, and so I would say anybody that's above age 50 that's smoked over 20 pack years, that would be 1 pack a day for 20 years, that puts you eligible for lung cancer screening. And so we do a low-dose CAT scan that allows us to detect cancer when it's much earlier. Perhaps it's related to that radon, or you were a smoker and there was some, working together to cause that lung cancer. When we detect it early like that, we can save up to 20% of lives. And so there is something that you can do.
Good to know. Dr. Castro, Dr. Barkman, always good to see you both. Thank you. Molly, your final thoughts today.
I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be on this. I just started in September, so radon was pretty new to me too when starting at the EPA. So I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the guidelines and hear from a few doctors that have seen this in their practice as well. And then I've also worked along with Brian very closely. So just want to thank you all for allowing me to be here.
Thank you for being with us. Yeah, we're learning right along with you. There was a lot to learn for me as well, so I'm just really glad we're talking about this. Brian, I can see why you're the go-to guy when it comes to all things radon. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for this lesson in science or chemistry or all the things. But give us some final thoughts. Anything you really want us to head out into the week and know?
I'm going to reiterate testing. If you're a Missouri resident, just Google Missouri Radon Program. You'll get to the state website. You can request one complimentary radon test. On the Kansas side of the border, we, through the Kansas Radon Program, we make test kits available to the county extension offices. So Johnson County Extension Office, Douglas County Extension Office, Wyandotte, and Leavenworth, all in the area, all have those kits available for generally around $10 to $12. That's, again, all costs included. It'll be a little less expensive than buying them off the store. So if you have not tested, test your residents.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hawkinson, final thoughts. Have you done a radon test, by the way?
Not in
we gotta
my
get you
current house. I need to get one for sure.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but that's what we do, right?
No, I think it's good. I think it's quite important for sure. Again, thank you to our guests and kind of getting this message out there. Just like Dr. Castro said, we were talking about lung screening before. This is a different type of screening, but so vitally important. There are just so many things. I know people are probably getting fatigue from screening and having to keep up with all of these things, but overall, moving forward, especially as the population grows, your family, your loved ones grows, it remains so important to continue to do these things, take these little steps, so that in the future you can continue to have a good quality of life.
All right, Doc Hawk, thanks so much. And thank you for being with us today and all of our guests. With Super Bowl just a few days away, we want to see how you celebrate the Chiefs. Check this out. There's Bullet the cat stretching for the end zone pylon. How do you cheer? Yes, look at him go. How do you cheer on the Chiefs? Show us by sharing photos or a video via Facebook at KU Hospital or Twitter at KU Hospital News. Send those in. We want to see them. Send the pictures, and then you might see them right here on air throughout this week as we get ready to cheer on the Chiefs this coming weekend. Have a great day, everyone, and see you tomorrow at 8. Coming up tomorrow on the Morning Medical Update, a gruesome freak accident, falling face first onto a spike. Surviving the skewer was just the beginning for 10-year-old Xavier Cunningham. I'm Jessica Lovell, coming up on the next Morning Medical Update. Our series of Where Are They Now? We catch up with the teenager and hear his prognosis now from the doctor who removed that spike. Tuesday at 8.
Subscribe to our Morning Medical Update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now everywhere podcasts are available.